The night sky burned with streaks of fire. Explosions tore through the blackness above the alien moon, ships twisting and breaking apart in silence. Inside one of the smaller shuttles, the noble alien girl sat strapped to her seat, her golden eyes wide with shock. She had been raised in palaces of crystal and light, never in her life imagining she would be fleeing for survival. Her father's fleet had been ambushed, their enemies moving with ruthless precision. The royal guards fought to protect her, but one by one their signals went silent. The shuttle's pilot shouted warnings, but she could barely hear through the roar of alarms. "Brace for impact," he said. Just before the shuttle shuddered violently, metal screamed as debris slammed into them. The pilot tried to steady the craft, but the systems were failing. In the chaos, the noble girl thought of her father, her family, the long halls of the palace she might never see again. Then, with a final violent jolt, the shuttle broke through the atmosphere and plummeted toward the wasteland planet below. The crash was brutal. Her head spun, her vision blurred, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. The pilot was gone, thrown forward in the crash. She unbuckled herself, hands trembling, and stumbled out into the cold wind. The world outside was a wasteland of jagged rocks and red dust. The air was thin, biting at her lungs. The sky was dark, except for the faint light of a dying sun sinking behind the mountains. She wrapped her cloak tighter around herself and checked. Her wrist communicator, dead. Her survival pack had only one water capsule and a ration bar. Her noble upbringing had taught her diplomacy, poetry, and etiquette. It had never taught her how to survive alone in a place like this. She started walking, each step slow and careful over the rocky ground. In the distance, she saw movement. Her heart leaped. Maybe it was one of her people. But as the figure grew closer, she realized it was no alien from her homeworld. It was a human, tall, rough-looking, wearing scavenger armor patched with different metals. He had a rifle slung over his back and a tool belt full of gear. He stopped a few meters away, studying her with calm, sharp eyes. "You're not from around here," he said, voice low but steady. She stiffened. "I don't need your help," she replied, her tone cold. He looked at her damaged cloak, her empty hands, the smoke rising from the wreck behind her. "Yeah," he said, "you do." He pointed toward the horizon. "Storm's coming. You won't last the night out here." She lifted her chin, pride burning in her chest. "I am the daughter of the High House of Vera," she said. "I can take care of myself." The human gave a short laugh. Not mocking, but disbelieving. "Out here, titles don't mean a thing." He started to walk past her, heading toward a ridge in the distance. Something in her wanted to call him back, but her pride locked the words in her throat. She turned away from him and kept walking in the opposite direction. The wind grew colder, carrying with it a sharp hissing sound. She glanced back once, seeing the human's tall shape vanish over the ridge. Her stomach knotted. The hissing grew louder. Then she heard it, the deep, low growl of something alive. She froze. Scanning the rocks around her, from the shadows, a massive shape emerged. It had 6 legs, its black hide rippling like liquid metal, and its eyes glowed faint green. The creature's jaws opened, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Her heart pounded. She reached for the small blade on her belt, knowing it would do little. The beast stepped closer, muscles coiling for the attack. She thought of running, but there was nowhere to go. The rocks were too jagged, the slope too steep. The predator's growl deepened, echoing in her bones. Then a sharp crack echoed across the wasteland. The creature roared, stumbling back as a burst of light struck its side. She turned and saw the human standing on a high ledge with his rifle raised. "Move," he shouted. For a moment, her pride still hesitated. But the beast lunged again, and instinct forced her to dive toward the human's direction. Another shot rang out, driving the predator back into the shadows. The wasteland fell silent, except for her ragged breathing, she looked up at the human, who was reloading calmly. "Storm's still coming," he said. "You can follow me or keep pretending you don't need help." She clenched her fists, her pride screaming at her to walk away, but the chill in the air was biting deeper, and the sound of the wind was growing sharper. She said nothing. The human turned and started walking again. She stayed where she was for a moment, watching his shape disappear into the rising dust, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she started walking the other way. The wind howled, the shadows stretched long, and somewhere in the distance, another growl answered the coming night. The human's figure vanished into the haze, leaving the noble alien girl alone with the bitter wind. Her pride kept her feet moving in the opposite direction. Though every instinct whispered she had made a mistake, the air tasted of dust and metal, and the sky above was turning a deeper shade of gray. Clouds swirled unnaturally fast, and she remembered the human's warning. A storm was coming, and it wasn't the kind one could simply endure by waiting. The wasteland stretched endlessly. Before her, the ground cracked and uneven. Small bursts of red dust rose with each step. Stinging her eyes and throat, she pulled her cloak tighter. But it was thin, and not meant for this world's sharp cold. The horizon blurred, the air becoming heavier. She felt the temperature drop suddenly, and the wind picked up with a low, moaning sound. Her mind went back to the palace halls. The warmth, the glowing crystal lights. There had always been someone nearby to serve her food, bring her blankets, or guard her sleep. Now there was only the sound of the wind and the knowledge that no one was coming to help. She clenched her jaw, refusing to imagine herself turning back to the human. But with each passing minute, the wind grew sharper, carrying fine dust that cut like tiny blades against her skin. The first real gust hit her hard, making her stumble. The dust wrapped around her like a living thing, filling her nose and mouth. She tried to cover her face with her cloak, but the fabric whipped violently in the wind. The sky darkened so quickly it felt like night had fallen in seconds. Lightning flashed in the distance, not bright and white like she had seen before, but red and jagged. The ground trembled slightly. With each strike, she knew she couldn't keep walking blindly. The storm was swallowing the land, erasing all shapes and sounds except the endless roar of wind. Her communicator was still dead, her body shivering, and then, through the veil of dust, she spotted something faint on the ground. Footprints. They were deeper than hers, larger, the human's. Her chest tightened, a mix of relief and frustration burning inside her. Without thinking, she began to follow them, her boots sinking into the shifting dust. Each print was half filled by the storm already. If she lost them, she would have no guide at all. The wind made it harder to move, shoving her sideways. She used her arms for balance, her fingers going numb from the cold. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The world narrowed to her, the footprints, and the endless howl of the storm. Then, through the curtain of dust, she saw shapes jagged, rocks forming a low ridge. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding, and there, at the base of the ridge, she caught sight of movement. The human was there, bent over something. For a heartbeat, she thought he was working on a shelter. But then she saw them dark shapes circling him, their bodies low to the ground, their eyes glinting faintly in the stormlight. Raiders, even through the storm's fury. She recognized their armor, scavenged, mismatched, covered in bone charms. Their weapons were crude but deadly. There were 3 of them, moving in slow arcs around the human, who stood with his rifle ready but not yet raised. The wind drowned out any words. But she could see their posture. They weren't here to talk. She wanted to call out, but her voice would vanish in the storm. Her mind raced. If the human died, she would lose the only living being on this planet who knew how to survive here. Yet running toward him meant drawing the raiders' attention, and she had no real weapon. Her small blade might work against a lone predator, but not against armed scavengers. Her eyes searched the ground desperately and found a sharp, jagged rock. It wasn't much, but it was heavy. She crept forward. Using the storm as cover, the wind battered her body, but it also masked her movement. One of the raiders had his back to her, his focus locked on the human. She inched closer, heart slamming in her chest. Her cloak whipped in the wind like a wild flag, threatening to give her away. Suddenly, one of the raiders lunged at the human. The rifle went off, the flash lighting up the dust for an instant. The second raider charged in, swinging a metal blade. The human dodged, striking him with the rifle's butt. The third raider turned slightly and spotted her. His eyes widened, and he shouted something lost in the wind. She had no choice. With a cry swallowed by the storm, she slammed the rock into his side. It wasn't enough to drop him, but it gave the human the opening he needed. Another shot rang out, and the first raider fell. The second staggered back, clutching his arm. The third spun toward her, rage in his face, before he could reach her. The human stepped between them and drove his shoulder into the raider's chest. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the dust swirling violently around them. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Two raiders fled into the storm, dragging their wounded companion, the human. The cave was cold and smelled faintly of dust and stone. The noble alien girl stepped inside slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The human had already set his rifle down and was unfastening a small pack from his shoulder. He moved with calm efficiency, as if storms, raiders, and near-death fights were just another part of his day. She stood near the entrance, watching him without saying a word. He pulled out a small metal device and pressed a button. It unfolded into a glowing heat coil, casting an orange glow over the cave walls. The warmth spread slowly, melting the numbness. From her fingers, without asking, he took her hands and examined them. His touch was steady but rough, his fingers warm against her cold skin. "You've got frostbite starting," he said. She tried to pull away, but his grip was firm. "If you don't warm them now, you'll lose movement," he added. She hated that he was right. Hated even more that she had to rely on him still. She let him hold her hands near the heat coil until the sharp ache faded. He reached into his pack again and pulled out a ration pack. The smell was faintly metallic, but her empty stomach tightened at the sight of food. He tore it open and handed half to her, keeping the other half for himself. "I have my own supplies." She lied, not taking it. He didn't argue. Just set the food between them and began eating. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant howl of the storm outside. Finally, she sat down and picked up the ration. It was dry, tasteless, but it kept her jaw moving. After a few bites, she found herself glancing at him. His face was weathered, his jaw unshaven, his eyes steady and watchful. There was no sign of fear in him. Even after what they had just faced, when they finished, he leaned back against the wall. "You're lucky," he said. She bristled. "I don't believe in luck." He gave a small shrug. "Then believe in skill." "Mine." Her pride flared at his words, but there was no arrogance in his tone, only fact. "You could have been dead twice over today," he continued. "I don't need your gratitude. But don't waste my time if you're going to keep pretending you can do this alone." She straightened, her golden eyes narrowing. "I am not helpless," she said. "I survived the fall. I crossed the wasteland, and you would have been dead before nightfall without me." He cut in. The words hung between them, sharp and heavy. She wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew he was right. The sound of the storm outside began to fade, replaced by a different noise, a low, rhythmic thump. The human was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. He moved toward the cave entrance and peered outside. She followed cautiously. Through the thinning dust, she saw faint shapes moving at the base of the ridge. Not raiders this time, but something far larger. Four-legged, with heavy, armored. Hides that shimmered in the fading light. Wasteland hunters, he murmured. They followed the smell of blood. Her eyes widened. She remembered the predator from earlier and the raider fight. The scent of death was all over the ridge. Now, they'll come up here. She asked, "They will if they're hungry enough," he replied. His tone was calm. But his grip on the rifle tightened. They stayed near the entrance, watching as the hunters prowled below. One lifted its head and sniffed the air. It's glowing. Eyes fixed on the ridge, the human turned to her. "We'll need to move before nightfall." The words struck her harder than she expected. Move with him. She had been so determined to avoid depending on him, but the reality of the wasteland was settling in. Without him, her chances were almost nothing. She didn't respond, but when he began packing his things, she found herself helping. It felt strange. The noble daughter of the high house gathering equipment like a common traveler. He didn't thank her, but she noticed he didn't push her away either. When they stepped out into the dying light, the wind was calmer, but the hunters were gone. Leaving deep claw marks in the dust, they moved quietly across the rocks. Heading toward a stretch of uneven ground, the human's pace was steady, each step chosen carefully to avoid loose stones. She followed, trying to match his rhythm. In the distance, the red sun was sinking, throwing long shadows across the land. Her legs ached. Her throat was dry, but she forced herself to keep moving. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her weak as they climbed over a low ridge. She caught sight of something ahead. Smoke. Thin, gray, rising from behind a cluster of jagged rocks. The human stopped, crouching low. He motioned for her to do the same. They crawled to the edge of the rocks and peered down there, in a shallow hollow. Were the raiders, the same ones who had attacked earlier? They were huddled around a fire, their stolen gear scattered around them. And beside them, half buried in the dust, was a small craft, a shuttle, battered but intact enough to fly. Her heart skipped. "That could get us off this planet," she whispered. "Yeah," the human said. His eyes never leaving the raiders, but they won't hand it over. She looked at him. "You have a plan." He gave a faint smile. Always, the way he said it made her uneasy. Part of her still resisted trusting him, but as the wind shifted and the smell of smoke reached her, she realized something. The price of her pride might not be her discomfort. It might be her life, and maybe, just maybe, this human was her only way out. Asterisk, the smell of smoke clung to the air, mixing with the dry scent of dust and metal. The noble alien girl crouched beside the human, eyes fixed on the raiders' camp below. The shuttle was there, its hull dented and scorched, but still standing on its landing struts, a beacon of hope surrounded by danger. The raiders laughed. Around their fire, their crude weapons resting within arm's reach. The human's gaze never wavered. "We can't take them head on," he said quietly. "Too many eyes, too many blades." She looked at him sharply. "Then what do you suggest?" He didn't answer right away, instead studying the ground around the camp. "Storm's over, but the air is still heavy," he murmured. "They'll sleep soon. We wait for the dark, then move." Her instincts screamed against the idea. Waiting meant giving the raiders more time to strengthen their position. But the human's tone was certain, his words measured. He wasn't guessing, he was planning, for the first time. She felt the faint pull of trust beneath her pride. They pulled back from the ridge and found a small hollow to rest in. The human set his pack down and began cleaning his rifle. She sat nearby, pretending not to watch him. Every motion he made was deliberate. No wasted energy, no fidgeting. He worked like a man who had done this countless times before. "What are you?" she asked suddenly. He glanced at her, one brow raised. "A scavenger, a survivor, not a soldier." "Once," he said simply, and went back to his work. Silence settled between them again. broken only by the soft clicks of metal and the distant crackle of the raider's fire. She studied him in the dim light, wondering what battles he had fought, what worlds he had seen. There was nothing noble about him, nothing polished or refined, yet there was a steadiness in him that felt strangely unshakable when night finally fell. The wasteland grew quiet, except for the whisper of wind over the rocks. The human motioned for her to follow. They moved low, staying in the shadows, their steps careful. Every crunch of gravel underfoot felt too loud. Her heart beat hard in her chest. The raider's fire was a faint orange glow ahead, casting dancing shadows across the rocks. The human signaled for her to stop. He pointed to a narrow path that curved behind the camp. "We circle to the shuttle. If they see us, we run," he whispered. She nodded, her throat dry. They slipped around the rocks, the firelight flickering in and out of view as they drew closer to the shuttle. She saw it more clearly, the hull pitted from blasts. One of its thrusters damaged but repairable. It was hope, tangible and close. But hope was fragile. A sudden clink of stone under her boot made her freeze. One of the raiders lifted his head, his eyes narrowing. The human grabbed her arm and pulled her into the shadows, pressing a finger to his lips. They stayed still as the raider scanned the darkness. After a long moment, he shrugged and turned back to the fire. The human released her arm, his grip, leaving a faint warmth through the fabric of her sleeve. They reached the shuttle's landing gear. The human crouched and examined the undercarriage. "Controls are intact. We just need to get inside," he whispered. She looked toward the camp. The raiders were still laughing. Unaware, "Then let's go," she urged. He shook his head. Patience, and patience proved right. Minutes later, the raiders began to settle, their laughter fading into low murmurs, one by one. They drifted into restless sleep. The human moved first, silent as the shifting dust. She followed her steps light. They slipped past the edge of the fire's glow and reached the shuttle's side hatch. The human pulled a small device from his belt, a thin strip of metal with wires, and began working on the lock. She kept watch, her eyes darting between the camp and the dark horizon. Every shadow felt like it could move, every gust of wind like a warning. The lock gave a soft click. The hatch slid open, revealing the dim interior of the shuttle. It smelled of stale air and old oil. The human slipped inside first. Scanning quickly, she followed, her heart pounding. The control panel was still lit, faint but functional. "We can fly this," he said. A note of satisfaction in his voice. Before she could reply, a sharp voice cut through the night. A raider's shout. They spun toward the hatch. One of the raiders was standing there, eyes wide, weapon in hand. The human moved fast, slamming the hatch shut before the raider could enter. "Strap in," he ordered, rushing to the pilot seat. She obeyed, fumbling with the restraints as the hum of the engines filled the cabin. Outside, shouts grew louder, boots pounding against the metal hull. The shuttle trembled as the thrusters engaged. A blast of light flashed across the viewplate. The raiders were firing. The human's hands moved quickly over the controls. The shuttle lurched, rising unsteadily from the ground. She gripped the seat, her breath caught in her throat as they lifted higher. The human glanced at her. "Still think you could have done this alone?" he asked. She didn't answer, her pride locked behind clenched teeth. But deep down, she knew the truth. Without him, she wouldn't be here. The raiders' camp shrank below, the firelight fading into the dark wasteland. The shuttle climbed into the night sky, and for the first time since the crash, she felt the faintest spark of safety. The shuttle shuddered as it climbed through the thin atmosphere. The engines coughed and whined, struggling against the strain inside the cabin. The noble alien girl gripped the edge of her seat, her eyes darting between the human and the flickering control panels. The human's hands moved quickly, adjusting. levers and tapping switches with the precision of someone who knew every sound an engine could make. They had escaped the raiders, but the danger wasn't behind them yet. Through the cracked viewplate, the wasteland stretched endlessly below. The dark surface of the planet looked almost peaceful from this height, but she knew better. Every shadow hid something deadly. Every gust of wind carried a memory of what could have killed her. She let out a slow breath, believing for a moment that maybe they were safe. That belief shattered when the human's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, checking the sensors. "What is it?" she asked. "Something's following us," he said, his voice flat. She glanced at the small screen on the console. A red blip was moving fast toward their position. "It's big," he added. Her stomach tightened. "Raiders." He shook his head slowly. Worse. The blip grew larger on the screen. And then she saw it. A dark shape breaking through the thin clouds behind them. It moved like a shadow with wings, its body long and sleek, covered in scales that shimmered like liquid metal. Two glowing eyes locked onto the shuttle. The human's jaw tightened. "Sky predator," he muttered. "They hunt anything that flies. Doesn't matter if it's bird, shuttle, or cargo hauler." The creature let out a roar that cut through the thin atmosphere. A sound that made her skin crawl. Its wings spread wide, catching the dying light of the sun as it dived. The shuttle jolted as the human pushed the thrusters to full power. The engine screamed, the hull rattling under the strain. She clutched the straps across her chest. "Can we outrun it?" "Not for long," he said. These old engines weren't built for speed. The predator closed the distance quickly, its massive shadow passing over the shuttle. A loud bang shook the cabin, the creature's claws scraping against the hull. The lights flickered, and the human fought to steady the craft. "She's not going to hold together if it keeps that up," he growled. "What do we do?" she demanded. He didn't look at her, his focus locked on the controls. "We fight." He flipped a switch, and two small turrets extended from the shuttle's sides. "They're manual," he said, unstrapping himself. "You know how to aim." She hesitated. "Not in a shuttle." "Then learn fast," he said, moving to the side hatch. He pulled down a targeting scope and waved her over. Reluctantly, she slid into the seat, her hands trembling as she gripped the controls. The predator circled back, its wings slicing through the thin air. It opened its jaws, rows of teeth glinting as it let out another bone-deep roar. The human's voice was calm, but sharp. "Wait for it, now." She pressed the trigger, and the turret spat bursts of bright energy. The shots went wide, scattering against the clouds. "Lead it, don't chase it," he instructed. "Anticipate where it will be." She took a deep breath. Steadying her hands, the predator dived again, this time from above. She aimed ahead of its path and fired. A burst struck its wing, making it veer off with a furious screech. The human gave a short nod. "Better." But the victory was brief. The predator swung around and slammed into the side of the shuttle. The whole craft lurched violently, warning alarms blaring. She was thrown against the restraints, her head spinning. The human grabbed the controls again, forcing the shuttle into a steep climb. The thin air screamed past them, the predator still clinging to the hull, its claws digging deep. The hull groaned under the pressure. "She's going to tear us apart," he said through gritted teeth. He reached for a lever near his seat. "What is that?" she asked. "Emergency vent," he replied. "Hold on to something." He yanked the lever, and a panel on the shuttle's side blew open. A rush of air blasted out, sending loose gear flying. The sudden force ripped the predator from the hull, sending it tumbling back into the clouds. The hatch sealed shut again, the cabin settling into a tense silence. Her chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath. "Is it gone?" she asked. "For now," he said, his eyes still scanning the sensors. "But it won't give up." They remember their prey. They flew in silence for several minutes. The hum of the engines filling the cabin. Her hands still trembled from the fight. She looked at him. "You fought these before?" He nodded. "Once. Barely made it out, but I didn't have anyone to man the guns back then." She swallowed, unsure how to respond. The thought that she had actually helped, even a little, felt strange, almost grounding. The human adjusted their course toward a faint glimmer on the horizon. "What is that?" she asked. "An old refueling station," he said, "if it still has power. We can make repairs before we leave the atmosphere." She didn't say it out loud, but she knew what he was thinking. If the Predator came back, they'd need every advantage they could get as the shuttle moved toward the distant light. The sky behind them darkened, and far back in the clouds, two glowing eyes reappeared, watching, waiting. The refueling station grew larger in the distance. It was an old, rusting structure floating above the wasteland's thin atmosphere. Its docking lights flickered weakly, casting pale glows through the haze. The human adjusted the shuttle's course, guiding it toward the landing clamps. The noble alien girl sat rigid in her seat, eyes fixed on the viewplate. Every few seconds, she glanced at the sensor screen. The red blip was still there, far behind, but never fading. The Predator was following, patient as a shadow. "It's waiting for the right moment," she said. Quietly, the human nodded. "That's what makes it dangerous. It won't strike until it knows we have no room to run." The shuttle trembled slightly as they entered the station's docking field. Metal arms extended from the platform, locking onto the shuttle with a heavy clang. The engines powered down, and the sudden silence felt almost unnatural. The human stood, slinging his rifle over his back. "We have to move fast. Fuel, repairs, and out." She followed him down the narrow corridor toward the docking hatch. The station's airlock opened with a long hiss, releasing a wave of stale, recycled air. Inside, the lights flickered, and the metal floor groaned under their weight. The place looked abandoned, walls streaked with rust, loose cables dangling from the ceiling. "This doesn't feel safe," she muttered. "It's not," he replied. "That's why we keep moving." They reached the control room. The human began working the old fuel console, his fingers moving over the cracked screen. She stood watch near the door, every creak and echo in the station making her tense. Outside the view window, the wasteland stretched endlessly. The sky was a pale gray now, and for a brief moment, there was no sign of the Predator. Then the lights flickered again, and she saw it. A dark shape slipping through the clouds, gliding low and silent. "It's here," she said sharply. The human didn't look up. "Keep your eyes on it. Tell me if it changes direction." The Predator circled the station, its huge wings cutting smooth arcs through the thin air. It wasn't attacking yet, just watching. She could feel its intelligence in the way it moved. It was studying them, learning the station's layout. Her hands clenched into fists. She hated feeling hunted, but worse, she hated knowing there was nothing she could do to make it leave. The human finished the fuel sequence, the console letting out a low chime. "Almost ready," he said. "We just need a minute for the pumps." The Predator's shadow passed over the window. Her breath caught. "It's closer," she warned. He glanced up. "Then we're out of time." He shut down the console and grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the docking corridor. The Predator made its move. A deep, rumbling roar shook the walls the next instant. Its massive head slammed against the station's outer hull. Metal screamed, and a sharp vibration ran through the floor. The human shoved her through the hatch and sealed it behind them. "Get to the cockpit," he ordered. They ran down the narrow shuttle corridor as the Predator struck again. This time, its claws tore into the docking clamps. Sparks rained from the ceiling as the metal arms bent under the pressure. The human threw himself into the pilot's seat. She strapped in quickly, her heart hammering. The docking lights flashed red. And the clamps began to release. "Hold on," he said. Slamming the thrusters forward, the shuttle ripped free from the docking arms just as the Predator lunged. Its jaws snapped shut where the shuttle had been seconds earlier. The sudden burst of speed threw them forward in their seats. The human banked hard, trying to put distance between them and the station, but the Predator was already in pursuit. Its long body coiled through the air like a serpent, its wings beating with terrible power. The chase tore across the thin upper atmosphere. The shuttle's engine screamed under the strain. The human's eyes flicked between the viewplate and the instruments. "We can't outrun it. We have to outsmart it," he said. Her voice was tight. "How?" He didn't answer immediately, instead making a sharp dive toward the jagged cliffs that jutted from the planet's surface. The Predator followed, its movements graceful even at high speed. It closed the gap quickly, snapping its jaws just meters. From the shuttle's tail, the human pulled hard on the controls, skimming the cliffs so closely that bits of rock chipped away under the shuttle's belly. The Predator was forced to adjust its flight path, its massive body weaving through the narrow gaps that things not afraid of crashing. She said, "No," he replied, "but it thinks we are." They shot out from between the cliffs and into a canyon. The walls rose high on either side, twisting sharply. The Predator stayed right behind them. The human's hands were steady, guiding the shuttle through each turn. Then she noticed something ahead, a split in the canyon where one path narrowed to almost nothing. "Too small for both of us," she said. "Exactly," he answered. He dove into the narrow path, the wings of the shuttle almost scraping the rock walls. The Predator tried to follow, but its massive frame clipped the canyon's edge. The sound of tearing flesh and scraping metal echoed through the canyon. It let out a furious roar, slowing. As it struggled to keep pace, the human pushed the thrusters to full power. The narrow path widened again, and they burst out into the open sky. The Predator was still behind them, but farther now, its flight uneven. The refueling station was a speck in the distance, growing smaller by the second. The human adjusted their course toward the upper atmosphere. She glanced back at the fading shadow. "Did we lose it?" "For now," he said, his voice low, "but creatures like that don't forget." The sky ahead was turning black as they neared the edge of space. She looked at him, the question forming before she could stop it. "What happens if it follows us into the stars?" He gave her a small, grim smile. "Then we make sure it never follows anyone again." Asterisk. The blackness of space stretched endlessly ahead. Stars shimmered like cold fires in the distance, but the noble alien girl could barely see them. Her focus stayed on the rear sensor display. The red blip was gone for now, but her gut told her it wasn't over. The human's hands moved steadily over the shuttle's controls, checking fuel levels and engine heat. The damage report flashed across the screen. Hull integrity at 70%. Left thruster unstable, shields at half. Power. She looked at him. "We can't take another fight." He nodded. "I know." He spoke without fear, but there was a weight in his voice. It was the voice of someone who had been in this position before. Someone who had walked the fine line between survival and death too many times. For a while, the only sound in the cockpit was the low hum of the engines. She thought about the moment they had first met the crash. The storm, her refusal to take his help. She had been so certain she didn't need him. Now she knew the truth. Without him, she wouldn't be here at all. Then it happened. The sensor alarm screamed. Her head snapped toward the display. The red blip was back. It was moving fast. She didn't need to look out the window to know what it was. The Predator had followed them into space. It burst from the shadow of a small asteroid, wings folded tight to increase speed. Even in the cold void, it moved with terrifying grace. Its scales caught the faint light of the stars, shimmering like liquid steel. The human muttered under his breath, persistent thing. He gripped the controls and adjusted their course. Toward a nearby asteroid field, she frowned. That will slow us down. It'll slow it down too, he replied. But we need more than speed now. We need a trap. The Predator closed the distance, weaving through the debris with inhuman precision. Its eyes glowed brighter, its massive jaws opening in silent hunger. The human pushed the shuttle into a tight dive between two spinning rocks. The hull scraped against stone, sending a shudder through the cabin. She clung to her seat, her stomach lurching. One wrong turn, and they would be torn apart by the asteroids. The Predator followed, its size making the chase harder, but not impossible. It clipped a rock with one wing, but it didn't slow. Instead, it grew more aggressive. Striking at the shuttle whenever it could get close, the human's jaw tightened. She's not going to let go, he said. Then what do we do? She asked. He glanced at her, his eyes hard. We end it here. He pulled a small panel from under the console, revealing a cluster of glowing canisters. What is that? She asked. Fuel cells, he said. If we rupture one at the right moment. She understood immediately. The explosion would be enough to cripple the Predator, maybe kill it. But it would mean flying dangerously close before triggering it. You'll never get away in time, she said. Maybe not, he replied calmly. Her throat tightened. You can't. It's the only way, he cut in. He began rerouting. Power from the shields to the engines, giving the shuttle one last burst of speed. The Predator lunged, jaws snapping just meters from the hull. The human swerved hard, pulling the shuttle alongside one of the larger asteroids. Get ready, he said. Pressing a sequence of switches, one of the fuel cells detached from the shuttle, floating in the Predator's path. The creature's focus locked on the shuttle, not the drifting canister. The human waited until the last possible second, then hit the detonator. A blinding flash lit the darkness. The shockwave rattled the shuttle violently. The Predator roared, its body twisting as the blast tore through one of its wings. Shards of scale and glowing fragments spun out into space. The creature drifted, its movements slow and uneven. It wasn't dead, but it could no longer keep pace. The human steadied the shuttle, guiding it clear of the asteroid field. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her mind struggling to process that they were alive. She turned to him, her voice low. You could have died. He gave her a small, tired smile. Wouldn't be the first time something in her broke then, not in weakness, but in surrender. Surrender to the truth she had been fighting since the moment they met. She reached out, her hand closing around his wrist. Her voice was unsteady. I was wrong. I can't do this without you. He looked at her for a long moment, then covered her hand with his own. You don't have to, he said simply. The stars stretched endlessly before them. Behind, the Predator's shadow faded into the dark. She sat back in her seat, her hand still resting on his. For the first time since the fall of her people, she felt something like hope. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Where will we go now? His eyes stayed on the stars. Wherever we want, he said.